This tutorial is for the really fun, chunky, stripey Christmas stocking. It's a quick, easy knit and can be changed up in a lot of different colors and different textures. I hope you enjoy knitting or gifting these. They're festive, fun stockings and can make great heirloom holiday gifts. To get started, you'll need 2 skeins of chunky yarn. I'm using this Malabriga Rasta. It's so squishy and comes in lots of fun colors, knits up super nice. You'll also need some circular needles. These are size 15 circular needles, 16 inches long. The pattern is on Ravelry, stitch markers, a darning needle, scissors, tape measure, and this needle felting tool is super handy to have. The first step in making your stocking is to cast on for the cuff. You can do this in whatever color you want your cuff to be. I'm just doing traditional cream. I'm going to use the long tail cast on method. We're going to estimate how much yarn is needed by wrapping the yarn around the needle 1 time for every stitch that we're casting on. So I'm wrapping on here 10 times, then pulling out the length of the 10 stitches, doubling it for 20, adding 1 more length for 30, and a little more just in case. And this is where I'm going to start my cast on. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. If you want a more detailed explanation, you can check out my Knitting Whimsy long tail cast on tutorial. Okay, we're going to slow-mo how you hold the yarn here. You're simply poking your thumb and index finger through the end loop on the yarn there. You're going to grab one of your needles. You're holding the ends of the yarn with your pinky finger and other 2 fingers. We'll take the needle, dip in between your thumb and index finger, and twist. And that's your first stitch on your needle. I'll show you this a couple more times. It's super easy. You just dip in and twist. That's your first stitch. One more time. Dip in and twist. That's your first stitch. Easy peasy. Now we're going to start the stitches after this by dipping in the yarn below the yarn on your thumb and over your finger and through the loop. We're just going to continue doing this until we have the 33 stitches on our needle. Dip in below your thumb, over the yarn on your finger, and through the loop. There's 3 stitches. Dip in, and pull it through. Now we've got 4 stitches. Dip in below the thumb, dip in above the finger, pull it through. Super easy. You're just going to continue doing this all the way across until you have 33 stitches on your needle, and then we'll join them together to make a loop. Dip in, pull through. Dip in, pull through. Easy peasy. Dip in, pull through. So we're just going to keep doing this all the way across until we have our 33 stitches on our needle. Here, I'm going to count, make sure I have 33 stitches. And I have 3 extra. So 2 extra. I wanted 1 extra. I really just need 32 stitches, but I'm casting on 33 so that I can link together by knitting in to this next stitch. And now I'm going to cast off this stitch just for a more secure link. I'm going to put my stitch marker here. And now I'm ready to start knitting my cuff. I'm going to go ahead and show you that link together one more time. I have my 33 stitches on my needles, and I'm going to knit into that first stitch that I cast on. Just really a simple knit stitch here. And now I'm going to cast off the last stitch that I cast on over top of the first stitch that I just knit into. So I just dip in there and pull it over top of the stitch that I just knit. And now I've securely linked my beginning and end of my knitting row. I'm going to put my marker here, and I'm ready to continue knitting in the round now. So now I'm just starting my cuff work, and for my cuff, I'm just doing knit 1, purl 1. You can change this up however you like. You could be doing knit 2, purl 2. You could do knit 1, purl 2, knit 1, purl 2. You can make whatever kind of ribbing you would like to make, but what I'm doing here is just knit 1 and purl 1. And I'm going to do this all the way around the cuff, and then I'm really just going to continue doing this. Knit and purl for the entire length of the cuff. Now I'm at the end of my first round. Just going to move my stitch marker and start on my second round. Same thing, just knit and purl. So I can follow my pattern like that, or I can read my knitting. Here's a knit stitch. It's a V, so I'm going to knit on top of that. Here's a purl stitch. I can see the purl bump, so I'm going to purl on top of that. Knit on top of the knits, and purl on top of the purls. The purls show up with the bump across, and the knits show up as a V. And that's what we're just going to do for the entire length of the cuff. Now you can see I've been knitting my cuff, and I've made a lot of progress. I'm ready to check this out and see how many rounds I've knit. So I'm just going to count these V's going all the way up this nice squishy cuff. And I can see I have 22 stitches, and it is about 9 inches. So I'm ready to cut off my tail here so that I can begin working on the body of the stocking. Now you can cut off your tail longer than this and just start with your yarn from your body. Or what I'm going to do is use that felting serger tool. I'm going to pull apart my yarn here, both the color that I'm starting with and the color that I ended with. I'm going to kind of just squish them together, and I'm going to use my serging tool here and just kind of punch in there to get these ends to blend in together. With this particular yarn, it just works amazing. I'm going to just keep on kind of scrunching it up there, using my hands to roll it together, poke it a little more, and then give it another little roll here. Look, it's all attached. And the beautiful thing about this is now I don't have to weave in my ends. So you can do this either way. It's 100% optional. You can just start knitting with your color, or you can use that handy little tool. So now I'm just working on the body of my stocking. You can just follow the pattern instructions. There's a lot of room for kind of doing whatever you want to do here. I'm just knitting, and then when I have about 2.5 inches, I'm going to make my first purl row. So this is where I'm going to start the purl row. You can see I have all of my nice knit stitches, made my nice little stockinette piece here. I have about 8 stitches. It's about 2.5, 3 inches, and that's where I want to start my first purl row to add a little bit of texture. I had knit across here 1 stitch so that I didn't lose my marker. So I'm just going to undo that. And now I'm going to start purling across this round. This adds that little stripey texture, and in this particular one, I'm going to put 3 of these stripes into my stocking. Some of them I've put 2 so that I could do a stitch overlay of an initial in the middle. You can do truly whatever you want here. Just make the body however you want to make it. After I did the purl row, now I'm doing a knit row, and then I'll do another purl row. I'm going to take a second here to admire my work. I can roll down the cuff here. And it's really coming together. I'm going to weave this end in here because as I'm knitting along, I like to get to admire my work, and so if I have my ends kind of not looking messy, it just makes me happier. You can do it now. You can save it till the end of your project, however you want to do your project. And particularly with this yarn, you don't have to be fussy about how you weave it in. I just kind of pick a few places to go back and forth, get it in there so that it's not going to come undone, clip it close, and then I like to use the serger to just make sure it doesn't come undone. Again, 100% not necessary. If you don't have one, you do not have to do this. There we go. Admire it. It's beautiful. Coming along, I can really see what it's going to look like now. I'm just going to continue knitting in the round, following the pattern directions, or do it however you like. You can see my purl row here beneath the one I'm working on. Now I'm knitting, which is really going to show off that texture. Here you can see I'm finishing up this knit row, coming up on my next round, which I'm going to do as another purl row. So now I have a purl round, a knit round, and I'm working on my second purl round here. I'm going to do this 3 times, so I end up with 3 purl rows to make a nice kind of ribbing texture at the top of my stocking. You can, again, adjust this to do whatever you want to do during the leg of your stocking. Here you can see I'm finishing up my 3rd row of purling, and now I can admire my work for a second. See, it's really coming together. I've got my cuff, my stockinette, my purl texture, and now I'm ready to just start doing some more of my stockinette knit rows. This is where you can follow along on the pattern, or you can customize it to be however you want to do this. The pattern calls for you to leave a big space of stockinette here with the intention that you could stitch over an initial in the end to customize your stocking. You could get some kind of a tag to put a name on there. You could do all kinds of things to customize it and make it exactly how you want to make it. You could also just add another textured stripe in the middle of the leg, which is exactly what I'm actually doing on this sample. So you'll see that here too. So here you can see I'm just continuing on with my pattern, putting in my textured stripe rows where I want them to be. As with any knitting project, it's always helpful to learn how to read your knitting. Let's say I'm just picking this pattern back up after setting it aside for a while. I can kind of check out where I am. I can follow the pattern and say, oh yeah, here's the cuff, and I can see where I've changed the color and I've done how many knit rows, checking it against the pattern, seeing that, oh yeah, here's all the V's. And then I can see that I started a purl row. The collar at the bottom of the stitch shows me that that's a purl stitch. And then I can see a knit stitch, another purl stitch here with the collar at the bottom of the V, another knit stitch, and a purl stitch, collar at the bottom of the V. And then I did several rounds of knit stitches, So it just really helps to be able to recognize a knit stitch from a purl stitch in keeping up with where you are in the pattern. And sometimes you have to stretch it out a little, kind of poke in there and see the purls and the knits. It's important to remember the collar is at the bottom of the V for a purl stitch, and a knit stitch is just the V's. So if I'm checking kind of where I am right now, I can see purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and a knit is on my needle because there's not a collar at the bottom of that. I can see where I have done my purl stitches, and I can tell that purl, knit, purl, knit, purl on the needle, and then I know where to pick up my work. I'm just going to pick up here and start knitting along again. So now I'm just going to continue knitting my rounds until I get X number of rounds past my last textured stitch and am ready to start my heel work. So here I am now, coming up on the last round of my leg. I've knit 4 rows past my last textured strip. I'm just going to cut my yarn of my leg color and add on my heel color here. I'm going to serge it the same as I did before. You can do this however you like. I think this is pure magic and it delights me to do it this way. You can do it however you like. And now I'm ready to start the heel. So the heel starts out with a half row of 8 stitches. So we've been working in the round. Now we're going to start doing a little heel flap that is going to be a flat piece. So you can see here, I am knitting my 8 stitches in my heel color. I'm going to turn my work, and now I'm slipping this first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front, and then I'm going to purl the next 15 stitches. So I'm purling across the half row that I already did, and now I'm going to continue to purl on the other side of my marker, and I'll end up with 8 stitches on each side of the marker, and this is what's going to make my heel flap. So here I am purling the stitches on the other side of the marker. Now I have 16 stitches that are making up my heel flap. I'm going to slip this first stitch and then knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, all the way across. This is a little bit extra, but I really like how it adds a texture to the heel. Now I'm turning my work and going to slip the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front and purl across the back of the heel flap here. Easy peasy, still 16 stitches, and I'm purling the slips and purling the purls to the last stitch, and going to flip my work for row 4. You can see the textured pattern starting to come along. The slip stitches take up 2 rows versus the non-slip stitches are just normal. Now I'm starting row 4, and I slipped the first stitch as always, and then slipped a stitch and am knitting. So row 4 is slip 1 as always, then you start the pattern of slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1 across to the end, and in the end we're going to end with a slip 1, knit 1, Here you can see those are all knits, so we're going to slip one. Here you can see you're on top of a slipped stitch, knit one, and slip the last stitch. Turn your work for row 5, which is just slip one and purl across. Then you're just going to follow the pattern similarly for row 6 and 7 of the heel flap. Now it's time to turn and admire your work. See how this nice texture is coming together. The slip stitches are a little bit longer and pull the work up a bit, making a bit more texture than the pure stockinette below. Honestly, this is optional. You could just do knit stitches, but I like how this gives a little added texture. Now we're going to start decreasing our work for rows 8 to 15, keeping the textured pattern along the way with the alternating slip stitches. On this row 8 with yarn and back, we're going to slip the first stitch as always, and then start alternating the pattern with another slip stitch, and then knit, slip, knit, and just continue following the same pattern until you get to the last 3 stitches. When you get to the last 3 stitches, we're going to decrease by knitting 2 together and then knitting the last stitch. Now we've decreased this row by 1 and have 15 stitches on our needle. Now you're going to turn your work and we're going to decrease at the end of this purl row, row number 9, ending with 14 stitches on your needles. Here I am at the last 3 stitches, and I'm just going to purl 2 together and purl the last stitch. Now I have 14 stitches on my needles. Keep following the pattern for rows 10, 11, and 12, and at the end of row 12 you will have 11 stitches on your needle. Now I can admire my work and note the decreases have made a nice shape for my heel. I'm going to do a little more shaping of the heel by leaving 1 stitch unworked at the end of the next 3 rows and continuing the decreasing and alternating slip stitch pattern. So this is row 13, which I'm starting with the slip 1, purl to the last 4 stitches, and now here on the last 4 stitches I'm going to purl 2 together, purl, and then leave this last stitch unworked. Now I'm going to turn my work and start row 14, which starts as usual with a slip 1, slip 1, knit 1, slip 1. I'm going to continue this until the last 4 stitches and then knit 2 together, knit 1, and then turn the work, leaving this last stitch unworked. Same idea for row 15, and then we're going to turn our work and we're going to knit across, and this time when we get to the end here we are going to pick up all of these stitches that we have slipped. See how nice they are? Because we slipped all those stitches, they're nice elongated V's, which will make it really easy for us to just dip in and pick up the stitches so that we end up knitting in the round again. So you just dip into that V right there, wrap the yarn around your needle just like a normal knit stitch and pull it through. Dip in, wrap the yarn around, and pull it through. Just going to do that all the way down the side. And this is picking up the side of that heel flap to pull it back into the whole stocking. The last place I'm going to pick up is this two colored V's that show up here, just going to be in the corner of my heel. This will help make sure I don't have a hole there. And now I'm going to put a marker here. This will differentiate between the instep of the stocking and the heel. And I'm going to switch from my heel color to the body of my stocking color. I'm just going to cut this off and then I'll go ahead and weave it in later. And now I'm just knitting across the instep of the stocking all the way across the 16 stitches that we left here and have been ignoring up until now. And now, same idea, I'm going to put another stitch marker here. So this is the end of my instep in my stocking, and I'm going to pick up along here. Here's also the corner, so I'm going to pick up these two legs here. I'm just going to get these two legs on my needle and knit these two legs together. This is a little bit tricky. If you don't want to do it, it's not really mandatory, but it just helps to make sure you don't end up with a hole in the corner of your stocking. And then I'm going to pick up all of these side heel stitches here, same way, by just slipping in and pulling my yarn through those two legs. This is really pretty easy, and what makes this easy is the fact that we slip those stitches, so they're nice and elongated and easy to pick up here. And now I'm just going to continue knitting across the bottom of the heel here to the beginning of the round. Now here I am at the beginning of my round. All of my stitches are back on my circular needles, and I'm ready to start knitting the instep here, which is the 16 stitches for the instep. Here are my heel stitches, which are 20-ish stitches. It should be 20, but not to worry if yours are a little bit off. We're just going to do some decrease rows to get back to 16 stitches instep and the bottom. So here I am, 3 stitches before my marker. I'm going to make a right leaning decrease, which is knit 2 together, and then knit that 1 stitch there and move my marker and knit across the instep 16 stitches. Here I am approaching the marker. I'm going to knit 1 stitch past the marker, and now I'm going to make a left leaning decrease by making a slip, slip, knit, a left leaning decrease. And now I'm just going to knit back to the beginning of the round, and I've completed 1 round of my foot. Now I'm going to knit around with no decreases, and then I'm ready to make my last decrease round. Here I'm making my right leaning decrease with a knit 2 together, knitting across the instep, making my left leaning decrease with a slip, slip, knit. Now I'm back to the center of my heel, the beginning of my round. I can take a second, count my stitches, make sure I have 16 stitches on the instep and 16 stitches on the bottom of the foot. And I can take a second to admire my squishy cuff, my nice body with the pattern that I chose in there, and my heel, all the stitches ready to make the foot. I'll fill this out now, and it's coming along great. I'm super pleased with it, and I hope you are with yours too. Now I'm ready to just knit my 8 rounds of my foot. I'm putting this marker here so I can track how many rounds I've done without having to actually count them. That marker marks my first round of stitches across my foot, and now I can just kind of mindlessly knit without having to count how many rounds I'm knitting before I start doing my decrease rounds. Now I feel like I've knit about 8 rounds. I'm going to count. Here's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now I know I just need one more round, and then I'll be ready to start my decreasing, getting ready for my toe. Here is the foot almost completed, ready for my decreases. I'll just be making them at the side stitch markers here, the right leaning and the left leaning decreases. Then I will fill in the foot and I'll be ready to knit my toe. Now just follow the pattern's directions for the knit rounds and the decreasing rounds. You'll do this until you have 16 stitches left on your needles. And once you have the 16 stitches left on your needles, you are ready to swap out your body color and start knitting your toe with the toe color. I'm serging my yarn together here to start on my toe. I'm going to knit my 3 rounds according to the pattern's directions. Now that I have those done, I am going to remove my beginning of round stitch marker. I still have my 16 stitches on my needles, but I'm dividing them 8 on the front needle and 8 on the back needle. When you have such a few number of stitches on your needles and you're knitting in the round, this is where it can get a little tricky. So I'm going to start using a different technique where I kind of knit flat the stitches on the front and then I knit flat the stitches on the back. It's still really knitting in the round, but I'm just doing it a little differently. So I've got these 8 stitches here. I have my cord kind of pulled out in the back there. I'm going to put these 8 stitches towards the front of the needle, ready to be knit. And now I'm going to pull that back needle forward so that I can use it. I'm tucking it underneath the yarn so that it'll be ready to go. And now I'm just going to knit these 8 stitches as if they're flat. So there's my first one. I'm going on down the row. Just knitting them as if they're a flat piece. So from this point forward, I am going to be knitting kind of in 2 sections. And we're also decreasing here. So there's my knit 2 together after the stitch marker. And now I've gone from 8 stitches to 7 stitches on this first half. I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on the back. So now I'm going to set up the second half of my round by scooching my stitches over to the tip of my needle. I'm moving all 8 stitches over to the front. And then I'll be ready to knit this section as if it's its own little flat piece. I'm pulling my back needle out, going to dip it underneath the yarn. And I'm ready to go, knitting these 8 stitches. And we'll decrease here too, once after the middle stitch marker. And here's our knit 2 together. That's 1 decrease round. Now I'm just going to flip it over, adjust my stitches again. Now I have 7 stitches on this section, and I'm just going to do a regular knit round. Just knitting these 7 stitches. Flip over, and I'm ready to do it again. Adjusting my stitches by scooching them down to the tip of the needle. I'm kind of a tight knitter, so sometimes this can get a little tricky for me, but I guess a little tip, if you want to, at this point in the project, try to not be a tight knitter. And now I'm just going to knit the back 7 stitches, and then I will have completed just a regular knit round. This was not a decrease round. Now we're going to flip over and do another decrease round. Adjust your stitches again. And this one is a little bit better for me. You can see I might have knit a little looser there. I've got my 7 stitches, and I'm going to bring my needle under my yarn. And now I'm going to do my decrease round. This time I'm decreasing before my stitch marker. So I'm going to knit my 2 stitches, do a knit 2 together, and knit to the end of the row, flip it over, and do it again. So let's do our back decrease row, going from our 7 stitches to our 6 stitches. Then we're going to flip it over, and now we have 6 stitches on both needles, which we're just going to knit around like this. Flip over, and now we're just going to knit the back of that round. Now we have 12 stitches, and we're ready for flipping over and doing our last decrease round. I have my 6 stitches, and now I'm just going to knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together. So I'm just going to alternate, knit 2 together, knit 1, I can lose my stitch marker here, knit 2 together, knit 1. I've gone to 4 stitches. I'm going to flip over on the other side here, do the same thing, knit 2 together, knit 1, lose my stitch marker, knit 2 together, knit 1. Now I'm done with all my knitting. I just need to clip my yarn. Now I'm going to scoot all of my stitches down to the end of my needle so I can pull them off. I'm putting them down with the end that is not attached to the yarn, so kind of the non-working end is going down to the tip of my needle. I'm going to put my darning needle on my yarn. You can see here's my working end, and now I'm going to be taking the stitches off from my non-working end, and I'm just slipping them onto the needle. There's my 8 stitches all on my needle now. I'm done with my needles, and I'm just going to pull the yarn through and cinch this end up. Now I'm really finished. I can just dip my yarn into the middle here, and then I'm going to inside out my stocking, weave the end through a space or 2. I don't get too particular about this. This is really thick yarn. It will just absorb into here super nicely. Clip the yarn kind of close, and then you can use your serging tool to just secure it in there a little more if you want to. Again, this is kind of extra, not really necessary. Right side it out again, and you have a fabulous Christmas stocking. If you want to, you can block this. You could block it, or you could just spritz it with some water and shape it into whatever shape you think makes it look perfect, or you can just leave it as is. I hope you enjoyed knitting this stocking with me. I'd love to see how you adjust the stocking, what creative element you bring, what kind of yarns you use, if you change up the pattern at all. And I hope you'll check out my Knitting Whimsy videos in the future. I'm going to be showing you how to make these cable knit stockings and some other textures. I think they're a super fun project. If you enjoyed it, I hope you'll like this video and follow along for more. Thanks for knitting with me.